Nice. And I'll go ahead and send this link out to everybody that has registered. Just I sent out the email telling folks to register, and it's a nice kind of confirmation on who's able to come. But on August 5th, the Montpelier Descendant Committee is doing a kickoff of its memorialization plans. And so I'm going to be doing tours of the burial ground. There'll be speakers in the afternoon in the Grand Salon. And it's going to be about talking about what memorialization is. The memorialization committee is made up of Dr. Michael Blakey, who's very well known in archaeological circles for his work on the African burial ground. He's a descendant. And Dr. Iris Ford, who's a member of the MDC and is an emeritus professor at St. Mary's College of African American Studies and Anthropology. So it'll be a great afternoon, and anybody that wants to come on that, I'll put some information in the email on that. And since so many of y'all are fairly local, you'll be able to, it'd be a really special time to see Montpelier and make what you all are doing in a week from then mean even more. So, and super excited about Emma, Dr. Thacker, you're arranging for Bruce Monroe to come, and our friend Joanne Brock, who's a descendant, is going to be spending a day with us and talking to the students. I don't know, are you all are going to do afternoon sessions like we've done in the past?
We'll do some, yeah, but it's not a course for class for like credit this time. So we're still going to do like some group reflection and make time and space for individual reflection and kind of work on whatever their own purposes are. But we won't have the formal like time working on a class project that we had in years past. We're still hoping for like tours in the afternoons and things like that. Um, and then some, yeah, reflection time. We'll do some structured and some unstructured reflection time. Yeah.
All right. Why don't I what I'm gonna do I'm gonna share with you the schedule, Emma, and then you could put
Great.
comments on this and also make edits to it. Because we want to make this work for please edit, especially the afternoon sessions. We've been doing the tours in the morning more recently because we're it gives the staff time to catch up on paperwork and get the site ready, so we don't staff doesn't have this rushed feel because everybody's staying there looking and being like, when do we start digging? But gives them an hour in the morning just to get things ready. And we certainly could, if there's a couple of afternoons where you all want to use Lewis Hall or Claude Moore Hall to do some reflection and discussions, that'd be great. If there's other tours that you all want, we could arrange that as well. So take a look, there's time, Emma, just to go and take a look at that and see and the property. You've been doing these together for a long time. So, what is, you think would be very beneficial to folks. So we can change as needed.
Great. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. So, well, for this, what we do for this about an hour is do have some discussions about the history of the landscape as we've learned about it through the archaeology. And through that discussion, a lot of times there's information that folks are interested in. And for those of y'all that are watching this, if you watch this and there's something that you want to learn more about, just drop me an email and I can shoot everybody, articles. We've got, all the sites I'm going to be talking about today. We've done, at least a year's worth of excavations, have reports written on them. And I'm going to send you all a web map that's a story map in GIS that has information on all the sites that we've been working on. And I think Melissa and I sent you all out some readings that have some of this information as well. But there's enough to, keep you up all night long until you get here if you're interested. So, but one of the things that we really I've found beneficial to discuss and have people think about is this concept of power of place. And this is something, Emma, I know you've heard this, and always like to hear folks' response, and have you all who are watching this think about as well. But what does power of place mean to you two, Emma and Alexa, and those of you all watching? Think about this on your own while this space is happening. What comes to mind with power of place? And there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just what comes to mind. Especially in regard to like a historic property like Montpelier. Get more specific about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think learning in a specific place or learning is always context based and based on where you are, what you're doing, who's around you. And so thinking of power of place at Montpelier, I think a lot of what comes to mind for me is the people who were there and the people who have been there over time. The interactions and people in the environment, as well as, of course, the built environment as well, and that used to be there, and that you all are discovering, and in some cases reconstructing. And you were talking. I'll stop in a second. Sorry, Alexa, I'm saying everything. You're talking about like the memorialization work, and I think that speaks to the power of place as well. Just needing and wanting physical space to hold spiritual space as well, and memory, and all that's wrapped up in place for me. I'll stop.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that came to mind for me was just sort of multi-sensory, because when you're in a classroom, or you're learning through reading, or you're learning through watching a documentary, thinking about history, each of those can be really rich and have multiple senses, but I think there's nothing so immersive as place, and I think that has power. I think it has cognitive power, right, in terms of how we build connections in our brain and remember things. We know that having sort of multisensory experiences can be powerful for that. A chapter that I shared with you, Emma, that I've written about sort of inquiry and learning about history, economics, social studies broadly, was sparked when I went to the Blue Ridge Tunnel, the Crozet Tunnel in Afton for the first time, and just like, I don't know, it was one of the more visceral experiences of my life. Just sort of felt bombarded with questions about, and I think that was sparked by the power of place, right? I was in the space, and that just felt like a really authentic spark for learning for me. And so I've been to Montpelier and felt similar things in other historic sites, and I'm excited to like let myself be awash in the power of place when we're there for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I love that. The multisensory is really a rich way to talk about it, and the difference between reading about or experiencing something through video versus even in an immersive video, rather than being actually in the space. And what you're talking about, Emma, with reconstructions that we've done in some areas, and areas where you've not done reconstructions. There's so many ways to approach power of space, and I think what you all are going to experience in a couple of weeks is the power of place in terms of how we represent the past. And a really good example of that, which touches on what both of you all were saying, is the South Yard, which is where the living spaces and the working spaces of enslaved domestics, those enslaved Americans who were working in the main house. This is right beside the main house, where we've reconstructed those buildings based on the archaeology. And 20 years ago, when I started, we had talked to visitors about that space, and there were no reconstructions. We had done just enough archaeology to know the sites were there, and people would see trees from the DuPont area and grass. And when you talk to them about this space and how it was this, there were these sites that were there were home sites and building sites, and buildings and work sites, people would ask about the trees. And they'd say, what are those trees? Did the enslaved live under those trees? And just had no idea. But then when we built the buildings, then the questions became so much more multidimensional about the space. Is that how the buildings looked? Is that how, did the yards have grass in them? Were they clay yards? And you get into the nuances of it all. And it really, the power of place is very much influenced on, what was there and how we represent it and what people are able to see. At the same time, it's also very different for very different groups of people. Like, so for descendants and many Black Americans who see the main house with the columns, it's not a space of nostalgia. It's a space that gives people either pause or, a reminder of pain of their ancestors' lives. And it's not a place that, they necessarily want to have a wedding. And for a lot of white Americans, there's a lot of nostalgia placed on these plantations because of groups like the United Daughters of the Confederation and the kind of imagery they developed of these spaces. And so, this power of place, it changes through time. It's different for different people, and it's multisensory, and it's something that is contextual, like you were saying, Emma, Dr. Thacker. It's like, it's based on what information and how you perceive things. And so this is something that you all are going to experience the week that you're here, because we're going to be going over a lot, and it's not just looking at Montpelier as a farm or a plantation. It's looking at it as a space where there are hundreds of enslaved Americans who were held against their will, who were sold, their families were divided. There is the fear of that, and just what we're recovering of the archaeological record and what it reflects of that. And also at the same time, it's the space where James Madison wrote the Virginia Plan in 1787, which became the basis for the Constitution, and became the structure on which the Bill of Rights was set. But at the same time, when it was written and ratified in the 1780s, that was, for a very small segment of the American population, white male landowners. And so today, that document grants liberties to a larger number of people. But with those origins, they become understandable when you understand where that document was written and what enabled Madison to write it. It wasn't just his intellect, his political intellect, but his family's economic power of being able to own people and own their labor and own their families and progeny, their children and the children's children who would be produced. It's a pretty horrific system that our country is based on. And with the archaeology that you all are going to be doing, that history is given new life and meaning, because the artifacts that people used are in the ground, and you all are going to be discovering these, and we're going to be talking about how we use these to put together this history. It's not just about finding pretty things in the ground. It can be, there's the ceramics that we find that have been look like the day they were made, except they're broken, are amazing to find, but they're also a reflection of the people that bought them and used them. And so that history is one that we're trying to unpack. And what I want to do tonight is to give you all some context to understand, just how multifaceted and complex that landscape is. And that, Dr. Thacker, definitely pop in on this as well, because you've seen, a lot of these sites you've actually excavated on, which is great, because you and Dr. Biddle started coming out in 2015.
Sorry, I lost my cursor. 2018 was our first summer. Yeah, summer program.
Okay.
Yeah.
2018. So that was when we were working on the Southwest Yard.
Yeah,
And
like the
the
Grove
Grove.
area. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, right. And when the South Yard was being completed, so saw a lot of these changes happening. So, but what I'll go ahead and do is I'm gonna share screens, and what you should see is not the schedule. Let me get rid of the hide floating controls. There we go. But the map of Montpelier. Hopefully you all can see that. Awesome. And what this map is a map of Montpelier. This is what's in brown here is this brown line is the outline of the land that's owned by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We've got about 2,650 acres. And then right in the middle, right in this area, is where the main house is. So this is the location of the Montpelier main house that we've restored back to its 1820s appearance. And the visitor center is just on the other side of this space. And where the site that you all are going to be working on is the overseer's site. And this site right here, this is a larger view of the overseer's site. Here's the visitor center right here. Here's the main house in the background. So when visitors come and park their car, they park in the parking lot here, go to the visitor center, and then walk over to the main house. And the South Yard is right in this area. And where we're going to be working is down the hill in this massive open field that is the site of this 30-acre farm complex dating to the 1820s that we'll talk about in a few minutes, that had tobacco barns, threshing barns, two blacksmith sites that we've worked on with the programs with JMU in the past, and then also the overseer's site where all these units are opened up right here. And it's right beside the Madison family cemetery, this little group of trees right here. So, but when people, visit Montpelier, and again, this area is all, basically when visitors park at the visitor center right here. And so you all know, this is all GIS. And what I've started doing with my presentations is, instead of doing it in PowerPoint, I use GIS because it just allows for a much more dynamic presentation. And these maps are ones that you all can have access to. I've got a story map that I'll send with a recording that talks about how to access this data and how to use these maps. And it's a resource because, when you zoom in, for example, to the main house, what you can see is you'll see this is the area of the South Yard right here. So the South Yard in this area is and it works well until GIS becomes a little bit pokey here. Let's see. Oh, it's really dragging. Holy cow. This is the area of the South Yard. Come on, computer. It's hold on. I'm gonna plug in. I hope this doesn't internet doesn't bomb out on me. I'm doing this from home, and a couple of times the internet is bogged down at home. But this is the South Yard. These are buildings that we've reconstructed based on the archaeology. And when you're in this map and you click on each of these buildings, what you can see is we've got reports that talk about, for example, the South Kitchen, the North Dwelling, the architectural summary here, the smokehouses. So with GIS, what you can do is you can look at this like, a regular map like you have in Google Maps, and similar to Google Maps with like, where you've got you're looking for a restaurant and you click on one of the addresses and the menu comes up and pictures of what people have uploaded is there. All these buildings have links to the photos that we've taken from various times of the excavations that we've done. So there's all kinds of things you can explore with our GIS maps. But for Montpelier as a whole, we're much more than just the area that's between the overseer's site down here where you'll be working, the visitor center and the parking lot, the main house, all the way over to the temple, which you all might recognize. This is the symbol of the Montpelier Foundation. This is about 1/10 of the acreage of Montpelier. And with Montpelier, what we've got of the 2,700 acres, when you look at this map right here, this shows the deed maps of what the Madison family owned in the late 18th, early 19th century. And these two parcels that are in gray right here, this is what made up Montpelier in, say, if you're here in the 1820s. And the rest of these areas right here are other plantations, such as the Houseworth Plantation, Tetley Plantation, and then down here, you've got the Bloomfield Plantation. So what we've got today of Montpelier, at least 3/4 of this land was Madison-owned land. And what we've got is the heart of the plantation right in this area right here. And what you can really see this heart when you, I think I sent you all some of the metal detector maps. I don't know, Alexa, if you had a chance to look at those. There's the home farm story map that was sent, and it talks about how we use metal detector survey to find sites. Did you have a chance to look at that?
Was that in the suggested readings?
Yeah, that was in the suggested readings.
Yeah, I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but I see the sites of labor, details from metal detector and other surveys listed there. And I see it links to an ArcGIS map.
Okay, yeah, I'll make sure. Maybe the home farm isn't in that set of readings. I'll include the home farm story map, because that's an important one, because that is the one that talks about all this area right here. And when you look at the
I see that too, survey of the home farm. Sorry, it's there as well.
Survey of the home farm. Okay, awesome. That's great, because when you look at the metal detector map, first, when we do our metal detector surveys, what we do is, we put a grid all across the property, and we use a 20-meter grid to find the sites, and then a 10-foot grid to actually find the buildings in the sites once we do our surveys. But when you look at this 20-meter map, what you can see is that this makes a heat map show up. And with this heat map, the areas that are in red are the areas where you have high concentrations of artifacts. And if you're doing a metal detector survey and you're looking for buildings that have, collapsed in place, what do you think the metal detector is going to pick up?
Nails or door frames, hinges.
Nails. That if you just said nails, Alexa, you're absolutely right. That's 99% of the artifacts. In fact, we call what metal detectors call nails is Montpelier gold, because when you look at these nails, and what Liz is going to go over with you all these artifacts on the first day, is the nails, not only do they indicate where the buildings are, but their manufacture changes through time. So you can actually date the building that you found with these nails. And then once the nails are located, once the buildings are located, once these sites are located with the 20-meter metal detector survey, that's when we go in and do the 10-foot gridded metal detector survey. And then all of a sudden you're finding where the actual buildings are. So for example, with the blacksmith shop that's right in this area, this is a blacksmith shop where we found the forge, and we found, we opened up units, we found thousands of blacksmith clipped iron, all kinds of slag. But in the metal detector survey, what we saw when we did the 20-meter survey was this was an area that, it was a big red blob that indicated there were sites in this area. And then when we did the 10-foot survey, what we started to see is where this metal concentration was, that's where the forge was. And then for the overseer's site, we were able to find not only the extent of all the buildings, but there was this one area in here that had cut nails that was where we were able to identify this 1820s overseer's site. So with these metal detector surveys, that's how we find the sites. And then once we find these sites, that's when we begin to open up the units. and begin to explore, what is hidden below the ground. And this is where we start to find, evidence for, like, for example, this subfloor pit right here, that this is a photograph of the finished excavation unit, and this dark stain in here, I don't know if you can see that. That's this pit that's full of eggshell and charred wood and trash that we're actually, hopefully by the time you all arrive in about 2 weeks, we'll have begun starting excavating that, and really hoping we'll be far enough and you all will be able to see what we're finding in this. So it's going to be really exciting to start to excavate these features. And these are ones that we discovered. Emma might remember, this is Taylor Brown. This is 9/3/2020 when we first found this pit. But
I do remember her. Yeah.
yeah, Taylor's doing great. She just finished her master's down at UWF, University of West Florida, and she did a lunch and learn with me a couple of months ago on subfloor pits. So we had a lot of fun talking about that. But so with these surveys and the excavation units, what we've done is, we've been exploring the property for, over 20 years. And the site where you all are going to be working at the overseer's site is this really, really complex site, because not only do you have the overseer's site right here, but right beside it is what's called the Mount Pleasant site. And if you look through some of the readings, this is the home site of James Madison's grandmother, Frances Madison. And James Madison's grandfather, Ambrose Madison, was only here for about 2 months before he was poisoned by 2 of his slaves and a neighboring slave. And then James Madison's grandmother runs the plantation for the next 30 years on her own, and markets the tobacco under her own name, and really makes Montpelier into this highly profitable tobacco plantation that used some pretty basic agricultural techniques. Most of the enslaved farmers were hilling the soil with hoes, and basically girdling the trees and then burning the stumps to clear the land. So this tobacco farming was one that consumed all 2,000 at that time 3,500 acres. And if you had visited Montpelier, say by the time of the American Revolution, most all the trees were gone. There is very few woodlots. Like today, we've got about 1,800 acres of woods within the 2,650 acres. But most of these woods have grown back since Dolly Madison sold the property in 1844. And when she sells the property in 1844, she not only sells the property, but all of the enslaved community. And Montpelier never returns to its agricultural operation of the 18th and early 19th century. And much of these former fields grow back into woods. But what I wanted to go over next is a really quick thumbnail sketch timeline of Montpelier and how we know about these sites. So for Mount Pleasant, we know about these sites from some of the excavations we've done. One of the first sites that I worked on when I got here at Montpelier in 2000 was what we thought was the childhood home of James Madison, Ambrose Madison, the site of his grandmother's home. And we found this stone-lined cellar hole that was full of all kinds of artifacts, like this fire dog, this andiron right here. And when we excavated into this cellar hole, we found the burned remains of the Madison's first home. And in addition to that, what's also at Mount Pleasant is a whole range of other sites, including this kitchen that also burned, but this structure burns in the 1790s after the Madisons have already moved to the brick main house up, just up the hill, a quarter mile up the hill. This is being occupied by an overseer. And when it burns in 1794, this is a excavation. This is a shot of the excavation as it looked when I started at Montpelier, and much of the rubble filled from that burning had collapsed into the kitchen. And when this kitchen burns, which was the overseer's house, this is when the new overseer's house was built in the late 1790s. And we know about this overseer's house from this plat that dates to 1840 that shows the overseer's house being somewhere between the main house and the Madison Mill. And on the map here, the main house is right over here. Here's the main house, as it would have looked at, today. And then the mill is down in this direction right here. This is the Madison Mill down here, dating to the early 18th century. So the overseer's house is right in this spot. So when Francis Madison passes away in the 1760s, that's when the new main house is built. And this new main house is this Georgian structure that would have looked like this. So this is really, this was the structure that when Madison was a teenager and he was coming back from some of his boarding schools, he would have seen built. But his childhood home turns out to be in this little structure beside the main house. And this was a building built in the 1750s when James Madison's parents, James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison, were married in 1749. And when they were married, what they decided to do is not live with a grandmother down the hill at Mount Pleasant, but they decide, maybe Nellie decides this. She wants to be in a very separate household up where their new main house would be built. But it's only after James Madison's grandmother, Frances Madison, dies that this house that we know of today as the original Georgian home gets built. And we found all kinds of archaeology in these areas relating to the 18th century. So this is the house as it would have looked during the Revolutionary War era. And during the American Revolution, what Montpelier consists of is a tobacco plantation. The Madisons are beginning to develop more plow-based agriculture. And this was not only, based on, changing agricultural techniques, but also that the Madisons had very skilled blacksmiths who were building some of the first plows for the Virginia Piedmont. And this blacksmith shop is just over from the main house. And this is this site that's located where the temple is today. So this temple, which was built in 1811, its predecessor is this massive 2-acre blacksmith shop, which some of the archaeologists shown here in around 2004 are excavating into the deposits of this blacksmith shop in this area. And so what we've got at Montpelier is, some really very complex history. Every generation of Madison do something very different with the landscape, and the enslaved community is able to pivot with their knowledge of the land to really change, going from just doing tobacco horticulture to doing blacksmithing, to plowing fields and raising grains, to doing more of the scientific farming that James Madison Jr. is known for in the early 19th century. So when James Madison Jr. starts James Madison Jr. Serves his political years starting with Thomas Jefferson in 1801, and he ends up retiring from the presidency over 16 years later in 1817. And by that time, what he and Dolly arranged for the house is the original Georgian home that's between these two chimneys is expanded with a duplex, and then these two wings are added, and then they changed all of the grounds of the house to include these ornamental pine allays leading down to a landscape temple, this grove of trees that Dr. Thacker and I were just talking about, the grove that with some of the first JMU programs that we started doing, the education department got to excavate, and then the south yard that we just recently reconstructed. So we're basically returning Montpelier to as it looked in the 1820s. And this is because of several reasons. One is when you look at the sites that are on the landscape, for example, if you look at the south yard and what we've done in our excavations at the south yard, almost all the archaeology you find around the main house dates to the 1820s and the 1830s. So you take up the sod around the main house, and you come across these foundations of buildings that were there in the early 19th century. And so what we're able to do with these archaeological remains is not just find, amazing ceramics and glass, but these foundations of buildings that help us understand, what this space looked like. And when you all are here, we're going to do, some tours of the South Yard where we talk about the duplexes and what we found in these areas, the smokehouses that we excavated in 2015. And you can see these excavations right here, what we found in these excavations, that in this case, massive deposits of trash from the duplexes just up the hill. These two buildings right here, these households threw their trash into this low area. And then finally, you've got the buildings of the kitchen that turns out to be this early brick structure. Let's see if this loads. Yeah, this early brick structure. Here's the foundations for the south kitchen. The smokehouses are down in this area. And then here's the north duplex right here. These foundations allowed us to reconstruct and understand that this building was this early, what's called a planter's cottage, with this massive chimney. And then this top of this chimney, we found literally buried in the ground. This is a picture of Liz. Liz is actually now the lab manager. She's writing her dissertation, but she recently came back when Mary Furlong Minkoff just left us this summer. And so Liz is in her old job, but you all will be working with Liz when you're here for a week. But Liz is showing this band of plaster here that's at the top of the chimney that matches this band of plaster at the main house. So what we've been able to do with all this, long story short, is, using the archaeology to reconstruct these spaces, but then also understanding that, sometimes this archaeology doesn't date to the early 19th century, but dates to the 18th century, like these foundations of buildings we found in the front of the house that relate to buildings that were, associated with the 18th century home, and then were taken down when the wings are added, that you can see right here. When these wings are added, this flanking outbuilding was taken down. So what we've got with the work we're doing at Montpelier with the archaeology, I'm going to close out some of these windows because it gets ridiculous, is, we've got this incredibly complex history that we've been able to reconstruct with the archaeology. And, it goes into not just the 19th century, the early 19th century, but also into the the period of emancipation. So the Gilmore cabin, for example, is a site where we've got a cabin that was built by former slaves of the Madisons, but in the yard, what we've got is this chimney base that dates to the time right after the Civil War, when the Gilmores first built their first home out of the remains of a Civil War encampment. And these are some of the past archaeologists in 2005 getting a little bit silly with one of our overhead bucket shots. So sitting around where the hearth used to be during the early history of the Gilmore cabin. I forgot that I had that one in here. Let me see if there's this shot of, this is a more serious shot. They're against the cabin here, showing the footprint of the early residents, and then this Confederate hut site right here. So, and then this is the picture of a picture of the cabin in 1910. This shows this little outbuilding that turns out to be the Gilmore's first home that they built in 1865, right after they were emancipated. So in all this, one of the things we're interested in with this property is, this much larger history. And a lot of this was inspired by not just the archaeology, but the work we've done with the descendant community. So For example, when we were first working on the South Yard back in 2015, we started working with the descendant community. And these are descendants of the enslaved community at Montpelier that today have given us a lot, shared their oral histories, and also become very involved with the archaeology and our interpretation. And you all are going to have a chance to meet a couple of descendants. One, Joanne Brock, is seen here in the black shirt holding a button that she had found in the South Yard excavations. And one of the things we've done that is very unique at Montpelier is not only have we done oral histories with descendants, but we've involved them in, what we've done with our interpretation of this space. So for example, with the South Yard, we not only used the archaeology to reconstruct this space, but we worked with descendants to create an exhibit that you all will be visiting called The Mere Distinction of Color. And that looks at the intersection between race, slavery, and the Constitution, and puts not only the Constitution into context, but also the community who lived and worked here, the enslaved community. And one of the things that the descendants wanted us to learn about their ancestors through the archaeology is, it's obvious that enslaved individuals contributed labor to the plantation, but also what was, when you talk about Madison in the main house, what do you learn about Madison? You didn't necessarily learn that he ate off a plate. You learn that the meals were served by the enslaved. But what do you learn about Madison when you do the house tour? And Emma, you've done this a whole bunch of times. So what do you remember?
You learn about his education.
Mm-hmm.
You learn about his relationship with Dolly and also with other leaders in Virginia and nationally and a little bit globally. And then you certainly learn about his time in the library and researching and crafting what became the Constitution. You learn about his death. I went a little out of order on the tour, but
Yeah, no, that was temporally, that was perfect. Yeah.
yeah.
You learn about him as, his the intellectual labor, and you learn about him as a political philosopher. And this was a question that descendants had is, our ancestors had intellects as well. And what was, we know that they performed labor, but what was their intellectual contribution to the spaces that you all are finding, to the agriculture of Montpelier, to the nation as a whole? What role did they have in the Constitution? And so this has made us really think differently about the archaeology. An example that I'd love to mention, because it's indicative of some of the growth that I've gone through as a scholar and as an archaeologist, is when we first started finding the post holes that make up the front fence for the what we've restored in the at the main house. This front fence, this overhead here really shows it. This is a 3D reconstruction of the house, but today we have this fence reconstructed. And what we found of these fence was post holes. These are the holes. This is looking into one of these holes, the hole that an enslaved landscaper dug in the ground, and they installed a post that you can see right here that when it rotted turned into a post mold. After the fence had been taken down, it probably was just snapped off. But what defines this post is this charred wood. And every single one of these posts had charred wood. And what we figured out is that these posts were charred before they were installed in the ground. And for years, I would talk about this, like I said, these posts were charred in a passive voice. How I used to talk about these is Mr. Madison would have the enslaved char the post before putting him in the ground. So the labor for that is, the enslaved would char the post and then put it in the ground. That's the physical labor. The intellectual labor in my mind, I automatically associated that with Madison. He's the one that had the idea to char the post. But when you think about, and this is, the descendants asking us, what are our ancestors' role in this intellectual labor? When you think about who would know that if you char a post, that it's not going to rot in the ground because it hardens it from insect infestation. I mean, how many posts did Mr. Madison install himself and dig up and see what was going on with them and understand what would keep insects at bay? Probably zero. So, and people that were doing that were the enslaved communities. So they would have been the bearers of that knowledge. And one of the things that we use as an indicator of this is if we're finding a unique set of agricultural techniques, a layout of a building like a tobacco barn that you don't see in any books or described in treatises written by planters, and it's unique to Montpelier, it's probably who's developing those ideas. As you're shaking your head, Alexa, it's probably, it's from the enslaved community. And so this is something that's made, the archaeology of this land so much more interesting, because instead of just making the assumption that Mr. Madison is the one with the intellect and the enslaved are the ones who are providing the labor, it's a give and take. And even when you look at the ideas of liberty, some historians have written about, the founding of our country, it's based on these political greats that were in Virginia. What made Virginia such a fertile ground for the development of the ideas of liberty? And some postulate, the beautiful views of the Blue Ridge, or the rich land and soil. Well, how about these presidents all being slave owners? And there's one person who's on our board who's just amazing. He's actually the chair of the board now, and I've thought he was amazing way before he was the chair of the board. But he's a history professor at Ohio State, Hassan Jeffries. He's written several books about slavery and freedom and the ideas of liberty. And he's written and said, if you're hungry and you don't have food, what are you going to think a lot about? You're going to think about food. If you're underwater and you're not breathing, you're going to think about how to get to air. If you're an enslaved person and you have no liberty, you have no rights, you're going to think about how to get those rights. And so the people that are thinking about liberty aren't the white males, rich white males up in the house. They're thinking about how to keep their wealth. That's what's threatened for them. But their liberty is self-assured. And so the ideas of liberty, when you start unpacking them from the Madison, the elite point of view, is ideas of property, and retaining property isn't retaining their land or their ceramics. It's retaining people. I mean, that's the big political thrust when you look at the right to own property in the 18th century. And the ideas of liberty that the Madisons know about probably is, from conversations they're having with the people they enslaved. So you think about what's the secret sauce of the Virginia political dynasty, of these Virginia plantocracy becoming the presidents and the founders of our country. It's enslaved, these interactions that they're having with people they are enslaving. And in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson has the gall to talk about being treated like slaves by the King of England when he's a slave owner. How do you rectify that? Where are those thoughts coming from? So this is something that we're exploring through this memory device called archaeology. And descendants have called the archaeology of the landscape at Montpelier a memory device for their ancestors, because a lot of their family memories are gone because of their families being divided. And then also the interesting tact that when John Payne Todd, this was the wayward son of James Madison. This is Dolly Madison's son with her first marriage. He's the one that inherits Montpelier in the late 1840s, and he inherits all the family papers. So all the the lists of enslaved individuals, plantation, the farm books, all these things that survive at Monticello. When he dies in 1854, all of Madison's nieces and nephews go to his house down in Gordonsville, which is just down. Here's Barbersville. Gordonsville is just down in this location right here. They go to his house, find 2 rooms full of documents, and decide there's way too much scandal there. And their Uncle Madison, Uncle Jimmy, was a very private man. So they burned all these books, all these papers. So all the papers that show where the fields were, lists of slaves, all those go up in ashes. But fortunately, what his nieces and nephews never knew is that we'd be going back and doing archaeology at all these spots, and that this landscape is incredibly well preserved. You just dig down 4 or 5 inches, and this is a site of one of the homes for the enslaved artisans. That probably this is the home for the blacksmith, who the blacksmith shop is here. This is where their home is, right here. And we found all these features that relate to the buildings that are here, but you've got all this preservation and history that's contained within the soil that we just need to excavate, 1 5-foot by 5-foot block at a time. And that's what you all are going to be part of when you're here, in a couple of weeks at the overseer's house, opening up more units and really expanding all these units that we've got in this area to connect, this checkerboard into this grid to reveal some of these buildings. So, through the years, I've given these lectures and I've gone into way too many details. And a lot of this we can save for when we're at this. I'll stop sharing screens here, but we'll save a lot of the details for this when you all are here. But suffice to say is you all are going to be learning about how we go from, bricks and nails and broken pieces of pottery to reconstructing people's lives. And then also, how you sew this story together into the founding of our country, how you combine that with documentary records, with the known political history. And, why we're doing this at Montpelier is not just to create the home of what Mr. Madison's home looked like, but who he was and who the people were that, were part of, his life story and the founding of our country. And so hopefully by the end of the week, you all will have, a very different picture, of what some of this history is and how we get to it. And, Alexa, do you have any questions, or Emma, do you have anything you'd want to add to all this?
No, that was a really wonderful journey you took us on. And I love that it comes back to, I think that's a really good hook, right? This idea of these destroyed documents. And I was like, but the history, like, how will we have it? Like, how will we get it if they destroyed all these records, right? We think so often, like, our minds go to these written records. And so I think that's a really potent connection to, but there's so many other sources we have, and it that have been preserved and that we can use to understand the place and then the people and so much that undergirds like where we are today, right? The roots of our country and its democracy and the failings of that maybe started there or started long before and were captured there and continue to this day. So I'm really excited to be there.
Awesome. Yeah.
Really soon.
Yeah. And so much of it is, we've, our constitutional democracy is one that has survived, but as you're saying, has not served everyone equally. And some of those flaws are right in the foundation of it, where it starts. So it's important to explore that. Dr. Thacker, do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think, yeah, that was a great overview, and I'm excited to get back there. And I think the only, I invite the people who watch the recording to be thinking too about, connections that we can make. Folks are going to be in different contexts as far as what they're planning to teach and kind of what grade they're planning to teach. And but this kind of making of a story and the way that archaeology fits into it, and not really the making of the story, the recovering of stories, and what connections, there's no class project or anything this year, but what connections we can be making to, teaching and learning, throughout thinking about the power of place initially, and then also as we work together throughout the week at Montpelier.
Cool. And
and you mentioned Dr. Jeffries and the president director of the board of what's his current
he's the
role?
chair of the board.
Chair of the board.
Yeah.
He has a really great podcast about teaching American slavery. So it's a good, if you're looking for a listening resource, that's something that I've enjoyed in the past.
Yeah, and the episode on Montpelier.
Yeah, that's right.
To definitely check out before we go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
We could link to that one specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's already in the resources. Sorry if I missed.
Cool. Yeah. And are the students that are coming, are they students of yours, Dr. Quinn and you, Dr. Thacker? Is it?
They're College of Education students. So
Okay.
I don't think either of us has ever had any of these students. Is that correct, Alexa?
That's right.
Yeah. So some of them are going to be like secondary teachers, some elementary, and they're at different levels as far as like rising juniors, rising grad students.
We have a teacher who's in the BIS program, so she's currently working in schools, and she's getting her degree to go into teaching full time.
Very cool.
Yeah, and then two other like JMU faculty and staff, and another professor from mine and Alexa's department, and a woman who works in advising. Would that be the best way to describe her role in the Education Support Center? So working with pre-service teachers in a different capacity. Yeah, so it's going to be a great group this year. We have a lot to learn from each other, as well as, of course, from all our interactions with you all and the members of the descendant community and the land. So
yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Well, if any of the folks that have had to cancel, if they wanted to come for like Monday and Tuesday, that would be fine as well, because I know a week sometimes can be a big haul to carve out from the schedule. So but it's probably easier to have folks come just for 2 days, like Monday and Tuesday, than to jump in the middle, because that is kind of the esprit de corps gets developed by then, and it wouldn't be as rewarding as an experience. But or anytime they want to come.
Thanks.
But Monday and
Thanks
Tuesday
for that.
they have a choice. Yeah, that always works
Thanks.
well. So, well, awesome. Well, what I'll do is when we finish up here, I'll let this do what Zoom does to it, and then I'll put it over to YouTube, and I'll send the link out, and I'll put in a link to the web, the story map that's the guide to GIS resources at Montpelier, because that's just, if any of y'all are map geeks like we are, it's a fun thing to play with. And then I'll make sure the home farm story map is in there as well. So, but awesome. Well, if you need anything in the meantime, we're going to meet at 5 o'clock at Arlington House, and I think you all got the directions there. And then we'll have dinner about 5:45. So, and that'll be on whatever that Sunday is, the
13th, August 13th. Yeah.
Awesome. So, good deal. Well, can't wait to see you all, and have a good couple of weeks in the meantime. And I'll also put the information on the August 5th event. And
Awesome.
What that is memorialization. Is the MDC recently received a grant from the Mellon Monuments Fund, $5.7 million to build a monument to the enslaved community at Montpelier at the burial site, at the Montpelier burial ground. And this year we're doing surveys of the burial ground. At the same time, we're doing excavations at the overseer's house. And we'll explore that when you all are here. And Dennis is doing the metal detector surveys. We might fingers crossed, have the GPR results by then, but we have to see. It's we've got some earlier GPR results, but we did some very intensive GPR earlier in May. So, but all right,
Exciting
well,
times.
yeah,
Exciting.
it is
That's-
exciting.
yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Alexa. So we'll look forward to seeing you all, and let me know if y'all need anything. Okay.
All right.
That's
Thanks
great.
so
Thanks
much.
so much for tonight.
All right.
Everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy
We'll
your,
see you
enjoy
soon.
your trip.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, great talking with y'all. Bye.
You
Bye.
too.